Food is a most sacred part of living. We explore the talent of cooking, and we eat to celebrate the most joyous moments of life. But would you subject yourself to be the meal on the table if it meant offering a hungry person their most prized feast? Armin Meiwes was born on the 1st of December 1961 in Essen, West Germany. A brother to two other boys, stepbrothers, Armin grew up with both parents around and lived a similar childhood to most. He had a good school program and good friends to spend time with after school hours. He was friends with many boys and girls around his age, all of whom found him easy to talk to, and generally a kind boy. Armin and his family enjoyed weekends and holidays in their country home in Rotenburg, which was about a 3-hour getaway from their family home. Here, Armin and his two brothers gained a love for natural, undisturbed beauty. The country home gave them a chance to enjoy being kids and discover the world of animals and plants that lived right outside their door. Every trip to Rotenburg was filled with happy memories and pure moments with the people who mattered most to him, his family. This went on for years, and for most of his childhood, Armin enjoyed the simple life. Family is crucial to children at any age and can truly affect development, either for better or worse. That is, until Armin was only 8 years old, when things all changed one abrupt day. At the end of summer in 1969, Armin watched as his father packed his belongings into suitcases and walked right out of the front door without turning back for even a second to glance at the life he was leaving behind. Armin stood there, watching, peering, as his father got into his car, turned the key, and drove down the driveway onto the street and out of their lives forever. What seemed upsetting for any child quickly turned into a traumatic downfall for Armin. Not only did he lose his father, but his two older stepbrothers also left soon afterwards, moving on to live their own lives without him or his mother. Armin and his mother were left to fend for themselves, something that was difficult for them. The emotional strain left on Armin's mother was visible, and after 3 failed marriages, she was left to take care of her young son without the support of anyone. Left with no money after Armin's father stripped the bank accounts, she had no means to provide for her son, and it didn't take long for this physical lack to catch up with her weak mental state. After the abandonment, Armin was forced to make do with what he had, and that left him with not much more than his childlike imagination. Armin's mother lived locked up for many years after the divorce, and she led a life of fantasy with her son. She would force Armin to dress in medieval costumes and partake in her strange coping mechanisms as her mental state worsened. She was controlling of Armin and didn't allow him to make a single decision of his own for many years of them living together. Armin was effectively a slave to his mother and had no independence growing up, which might explain why he turned to creating imaginary friends to solve the problems of his loneliness. He spent many years around the age of 8 creating an imaginary younger brother who saved him from his dark days of being locked up at home. For many years, this brother was a way for Armin to have a friend to be with and confide in, making his days much less lonely. He was able to feel like he had a real friend who liked spending time with him, which was something he lost as his mother got more controlling and let him out of the house less frequently. But as he grew older, this imaginary brother turned into something more, some way for Armin to release his urge for romantic desires that were building up over many years. Armin had no real friends, no real connections, and rarely saw anyone besides his mother. Armin needed another way to feel close to people, a way he could satisfy his needs and make friends who allowed him to feel whole again. Armin had a desire for a bond so deep it could only be met by going past physical relationships that satisfy most individuals' cravings. Armin needed to feel more connected, closer to the soul of those with whom he loved and shared intimacy with. Specifically, Armin had a desire for men and boys, and he didn't feel attracted to girls his age like most boys did. Armin realized the only way he could feel this close to any boy would be to eat them, piece by piece, until they could be fully inside him. By carrying his lover inside him, he could feel complete, and he would never be lonely again. He related these urges to the fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel, a story he was read often as a young child during the depressing days of his family life crumbling. Hansel and Gretel are abandoned in a forest, where they meet a witch who forces Gretel to feed her brother enough food that he becomes suitable to be eaten by the witch herself. Armin, however, never acted on these urges, and he never had an intention to act out of soul, impulse, or need. He was not a killer, and he did not want to hurt anyone, especially those he loved most. Armin fantasized about a devoted man handing himself over, ready to be indulged in, as a sincere form of respect and love for Armin himself. Armin wanted to be adored so dearly that his lover would volunteer to be eaten alive, and this was a desire that Armin frequently imagined as a young teenager. Armin imagined this fantasy for the rest of his upbringing, and even as he attended school and met more and more students, it never strayed far from his mind. After school, Armin joined the army for more than a decade, 12 years to be exact, where he made his way through several promotions and was well recognized by those around him. He had made a name for himself, and a very respected one at that. This experience may have healed some of the trauma caused by his mother, allowing him to make good friends and socialize normally with people for possibly the first time in his life. His cannibal impulses slowed down, and he was happy. For a short time, Armin even carried on a relationship with a woman, Petra. Armin and Petra met through a marriage agency, and they seemed to be off to a good start. His mother, however, gave no blessing to the couple, and Armin had to leave Petra in order to obey his mother's terms. Armin continued to feel controlled by his mother until she passed away after a fatal car accident in 1996. Armin was left to fend for himself, but most importantly, to deal with his compulsive obsessions and fantasies that had followed him for nearly his entire life. After the death of his mother, Armin felt free to move on and begin his own life on his own terms. Armin became a computer repair technician, where he made his own money and maintained the old family country house on his own. He had a normal life, a life where he sailed on the weekends and rode horses with friends living nearby. He and his neighbour, Nicole, had a friendly relationship and got along quite well. Armin used to babysit her 4 young children when she was out of the house, and they had a trusting community where everybody looked out for each other. However, this was Armin's first experience as an adult who had the power to make all the decisions in his life. He spent his evenings engaging in internet culture and exploring the power of chat forums and discussion groups under anonymous names. Aside from zombie movies, Armin watched animal slaughterhouse films every night until he came across something he liked even more. When Armin read that other people online were into talking about cannibalism too, he knew he was in the right place. Armin found groups online that spoke about cannibalism fetishes just like his. One site, known as the Cannibal Cafe, was filled with people who spoke about everything Armin had imagined inside his head. After discovering the forums, Armin indulged in them. At first he took them lightly and assumed not everyone there was like him. But after frequenting the chat rooms and keeping up to date with new posts, Armin became more and more entranced by what he was seeing. These people were just like him and were admitting to the same desires he had suppressed for so long after feeling ashamed for his fetishes. There were hundreds of people on the site, many offering for themselves to be eaten, something Armin never thought could be true. He'd finally found a place that could make these feverish dreams come true, and it was right in front of his eyes. Armin began to reach out to people on the forum and respond to people who were reaching out to him. Using his alias, Frankie, Armin met men online who were attracted to his fetishes and shared similar desires. They spoke about what each craved and desired the most, what they were looking for through meeting up with a partner. Most of these people were uninterested in what Armin was searching for, and the same went for him. People reached out to him with proposals for scenarios he had no interest in, and he saw that it would take some time to weed through the conversations and find a perfect match. He posted active ads on the site, some of which listed what he was looking for: a normally built 18 to 25-year-old man who wanted to be slaughtered and consumed. His first encounter was with a chef who was offering for Armin to pretend to kill and eat him. Another group member asked him to pin papers on him with names of meat as a way to build sexual desire and attraction. But none of this was enough for Armin, and he wasn't into the pretending or the simulations. He wanted and needed it to be real, and most importantly, he needed consent from the other side. He was no killer, and this was only going to happen if he could somehow find someone who was more than willing to volunteer as dinner. No one met these needs until Armin met a man named Bernd. Bernd Jürgen Armando Brandes was a 43-year-old man who worked as an engineer in Berlin. Bernd also had had a traumatic past that allowed him to bond with Armin about their failed childhoods and horrible memories. Bernd's mother took her life when he was only 5 years old, and he grew up with a fading and shallow relationship with his father. Many years down the line, when Bernd expressed to his father that he was gay, whatever was left of their sorry relationship quickly deteriorated. They no longer spoke or kept in touch, and his familial relationships were all history. Now, living alone as an adult, Bernd lived two lives, similar to Armin, one as a successful businessman, and one as an explorer of his sexual nature in pursuit of his true passion. A male prostitute who spent much of his time serving Bernd attested to his desire to feel pain and claimed his biggest fantasy was to have his penis ripped off with one bite. When Bernd reached out to Armin, his text read, "Your dinner," and offered him the chance to eat him alive. To Armin, who had dreamt of this for so long, that text was undeniable. It didn't take long for the two to connect via their online chats, and before long, they were anticipating meeting in person to see their dreams come to life. On the 9th of March 2001, Bernd and Armin met at the Kassel train station, a few hours' drive from Rotenburg. Armin picked Bernd up and took them both back to his country house, where the action soon began. Once home, the two quickly became comfortable with one another, and as they began to undress, they made their way to an unused room in the house. The sex they had was not enough for Bernd, who needed a deeper and more satisfying connection that could not be met through purely exterior physical contact. Bernd, getting frustrated and anxious to increase the tension and connection between the two, accused Armin of being, quote, too weak to go any further and to continue the sensations they had already spoken about online. So they headed back to the station to return Bernd to Berlin, since their endeavours could not be accomplished. Once at the station, Armin had a change of opinion. He had been hoping for this for so long, and he craved what Bernd was offering him after waiting for years. Armin begged Bernd to stay and told him that he'd changed his mind and that he wanted to go back to his home to complete their task. On the way back, the two men purchased sleeping pills so they could separate Bernd's body parts without struggle. Back at Armin's home, the two spent hours speaking about what they were going to do. But this was taking far too long, and Bernd was angry that Armin would not just go ahead and do what they'd wanted. Bernd snapped, and he yelled at Armin to get on with it and begin the process. The plan had already been decided. The men were going to use a set-up video camera to record everything from a wide perspective, so Bernd could watch his facial expressions after he was cut. After this, they would quickly cook and eat the dismembered piece of Bernd, who would pass later on in the night, for Armin to eat the rest of him for months to come. Once they had begun, they would have no choice but to keep going. The act would take place in a small room in Armin's country home that held a bathtub, a boarded-up window, and a few small objects such as benches and tables. At 6:30 p.m, Armin was preparing to cut off Bernd's penis. He used a knife, which ended up being too dull to cut through after a failed first attempt, and so he exchanged it with something sharper from the kitchen. Then he sliced the entire piece off, which led to rapid bleeding, and Bernd let out a scream of pain. After a few seconds, the screaming stopped, and Bernd told Armin that he no longer felt any pain, but a sense of euphoria. He asked Armin to slice the piece in half and cook it, so that they could both indulge before fate took over. Armin did just that. He took both pieces of Bernd to the kitchen and prepared them on a sizzling skillet, and then added them into a stew-like meal. Unfortunately, the heat caused the meat to shrink so much that there was barely anything for either of them to test. Bernd attempted to eat what was left of his half, while he sat there bleeding out. After the initial cut, Armin took Bernd to his large bathtub and set him inside it as he filled the bath with piping hot water that would boil his lover and put him into a deep sleep before he passed. Armin went back and forth between reading Star Trek magazines in his bedroom and checking in on Bernd every 15 minutes on the dot. After a while, Bernd was sitting in a tub of his own blood. He attempted to leave the bathtub, but he was too light-headed to make it anywhere, and he collapsed onto the floor. Armin carried him to the bed and set him down, where he drifted in and out of consciousness for the next few hours. After hours of profuse bleeding, whilst under the influence of the sleeping pills, Armin decided to put him out of his pain and misery and sliced his neck, ending his life. Armin was now responsible for the next part of the plan. He beheaded Bernd and hung his corpse on a mounted hook from his ceiling. From here, Armin was able to dismember his body and separate him into sizable pieces that could be frozen and cooked later on. He washed and froze each part, storing them in a false bottom under his freezer, and over the next 10 months, Armin would eat over 53 pounds of Bernd's flesh. Armin later described the scene of cooking human flesh, and it sounded like something out of a horror film. He would set candles on his table and take out only his best plates and cutlery to serve his dear lover. His first bite of human flesh was strange, but it satisfied the cravings he'd had since his early days back with his imaginary little brother. 2 days after Bernd's death, his boyfriend back in Berlin reported him missing. He had not heard from him or seen him in days, and he was starting to become suspicious about where he could have disappeared to. However, before the death, Bernd had been thorough enough to delete all the files and proof of communication that tied him to either the Cannibal Café or specifically Armin. For months, police searched for a sign of where he could have gone, but there was nothing to explain his disappearance. Over these months, Armin continued to look for other victims online. There were other offers that were given to Armin throughout his journey of seeking out a willing victim, some of which were even too gruesome for him. One man reached out to Armin, to offer him to, quote, burn his testicles with a flamethrower and hammer his body down with nails and pins. Armin turned down this offer, along with many others, and he quickly learned the extent of the world he had gotten himself into. An Austrian student came across photos and videos posted by Armin online showcasing his time with Bernd. Frightened and disgusted, the student alerted the authorities, believing he had come across evidence of a murder. 5 months after this, in December 2002, 6 officers entered Armin's Rotenburg home with a search warrant and looked around the premises. After searching, the officers found and collected multiple pieces of incriminating evidence, including evidence on his computer, a video camera, numerous incriminating tapes, 3 knives, 1 axe, and a single butcher's apron. This evidence was more than enough for the police to arrest him and begin the process of pressing charges for the murder of Bernd. The news quickly spread across Germany and neighbouring countries, where Armin's actions would soon become the story behind multiple hit songs and films.
Armin Meiwes. Free Armin Meiwes. Armin Meiwes. Free Armin Meiwes. Armin Meiwes. Free Armin Meiwes. Free Armin Meiwes, ich sag es, ich meine es, ich baller mir Teile in Line, falls es weiß es. Kannibalen drip, ich esse dein Kaffer, trinke dein Blut wie ein Mineralwasser und ficke dein Nutten auf Tille im Pascha. Fick auf die Fillen, sie leben in den Wasser.
The commotion was widespread, and even as people found this far-fetched crime almost humorous, the fear of being eaten was looming in communities. After the initial arrest, Armin had to undergo time in the provincial court of Kassel in order to be sentenced. Throughout this trial, the evidence made a complex case that was not easy for the judge to wrap his head around. Germany had no laws against cannibalism, so what Armin was doing was not entirely illegal. Plus, as Armin continued to claim that Bernd was a willing victim, there was a decision to be made about whether Armin should even be tried with murder charges. During the court trial, 19 minutes of the 4-hour tape was shown to the jury and visitors sitting in. The horrific and gory images were shown in order to lay out all of the evidence that took place in what would become known as the slaughter room. This video also gave clear consent from Bernd himself, but of course, in any court of law, this was taken with suspicion. No one could be sure that Bernd wasn't being held against his will and told to say such crazy things. And it was more than difficult for anyone to believe he gave permission to be killed. Armin admitted to both killing and eating Bernd, and even expressed his regret for what happened. Psychiatrists deemed him mentally stable, so Armin was fully aware of the actions he committed that night. The prosecution asked for a life sentence for Armin due to, quote, sexually motivated murder and disturbance of the rest of the dead. On the other hand, the defense asked for a conviction of, quote, murder with consent of the victim. On the 30th of January 2004, the judge charged Armin with manslaughter and sentenced him to 8 years in prison. The following year, in 2005, the prosecution appealed the decision of the provincial court. They believed the sentence was irresponsible and that 8 years was not nearly a long enough sentence for someone who had committed such acts. The trial was taken up a level to the Supreme Federal Court, where a repeat trial was opened due to reasons of insufficient evidence. This time, Armin was found guilty of murder, and his sentence was changed to life in prison. To this day, Armin remains serving this sentence in a high-security prison in Kassel, where he will be forever. The trial in all was not an easy one. Many of the people who saw the tapes were sent to therapy to deal with the mental repercussions. This was the first case to appear under such strange circumstances. Although courts typically follow rules of precedence, meaning that they follow what other courts have decided in the past, this case had no route to follow. Ironically, now 15 years after being sentenced to life in prison, Armin is a vegetarian. He has also been allowed outside of the prison on supervised day trips, and the jail even supplies him with disguises so he won't be recognized in public. In some odd and eerie way, Armin is apparently a model prisoner, still friendly and outgoing, as many of his neighbours from the country home remember him being. The choices he made throughout his life led Armin to create a reputation as one of the most infamous psychopaths in history. It's rare to find a story as gory and illustrative as his, which is why this story spread so fast. Once the news was out, it didn't take long for Armin to collect the moniker the Rotenburg Cannibal. The ambiguity of the crimes spooked nations, as no one could grasp the concept of consensual murder. To this day, Armin's story is one of the eeriest to hear and to imagine yourself in. It is, after all, the stuff of fairy tales. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. If you'd like to support me and help this channel grow, please take a second to like and leave a comment. And do subscribe if you'd like to see similar videos in the future. Until then, take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.